Please welcome Dr. Marcius Extavour. Thank you.
Hey everybody, I hope you had a good coffee. Thank you for the warm introduction, and thank you to our hosts, not just for doing the work that you do, but for putting on events like this where we can actually get together and exchange ideas. So I'm still thinking a lot about carbon removal, day to day, week to week, but I'm also thinking a little more broadly about how that conversation and how this topic fits into the broader climate change discussion. I'm using a metaphor, these little circles on my title slide. The big circle is the climate change conversation, and the blue circle is the carbon removal community. We're not quite in the in club yet. It's taken some time to get to this point, but I think we're making great progress. It's a question of mutual understanding. What I'd like to do today is offer just a couple of ideas to reflect on and hopefully say some things that maybe you disagree with so you can come find me later. I'm here representing Time CO2, which is a new business trying to help other businesses take credible action on climate and nature. But it's also connected to the media company Time. And I'm explaining this because I'm thinking a lot more, even though I am a physicist and engineer in disguise, I'm thinking a lot more about things like narrative and analogy and mood and conversation and storytelling. We do this through portfolios of quality solutions, but also storytelling. So this is what I do, and this is what I'm going to talk a little bit about more broadly today. This is a mental model that helps me personally think about where carbon removal and climate action fits into today's conversation. It's extremely simple, but I personally find it helpful. There are 3 stages of climate action. I originally conceived of this thinking about carbon removal, but I think it applies to climate action. So in the beginning, there was nothing. In fact, we didn't even realize that our fossil economy was a problem. A few people did, but I'm talking about a couple centuries ago. This is the blissful ignorance period. It's responsible for our quality of life today, but we now know we have a serious problem. For the last generation or so, we've been in the second period, climate action 1. We knew there was a problem, but we didn't really want to do anything about it. We delayed, we convinced ourselves, some of us more than others convinced the rest of us that this was not a real problem, let's delay, it's not a real thing. But the point is, I think we're entering a new era, and that's where I want to focus on today. I don't think we're fully there yet, but I think we're at the cusp of this new era. The Climate Action 2.0. It's opportunity seeking. People are realizing that not only is this a problem that needs to be solved, but there's actually an opportunity for community building, for new investment, for growth, for actually solving climate and nature problems. And this is drawing in a lot of outside actors and new energy and new conversation. This is very exciting. I think carbon removal is part of this. It's a topic that wasn't part of the traditional flow of climate conversation, has now entered that flow. But this also applies to things like climate finance, economics, community building, business, media. 5 years ago, a lot of those communities just weren't focused on climate, and they are beginning to. This is a good thing. It's confusing. It means there's different languages we have to navigate, but it's overall a good thing. But we're at the beginning. Carbon removal is in its infancy. In some ways, it's like a child. Okay, so this is my bullet point list of characteristics of children. I'm going to talk about the couple in bold. The point here is that it's early days, and it really depends on your point of view how you see this new thing. This is a picture of my daughter, my youngest daughter. When I whip out my phone and ask her to, hey, pose for the camera, sometimes she does things like this, all right? Now, I'm her father, so I look at this and I think, oh, what a sweet kid. Imagine the person she'll become one day. But you could be forgiven, if you don't care about her like I do, for just thinking, what a ridiculous child doing an impersonation of an adult. It's crazy. I think CDR looks like this to a lot of people, especially a lot of climate people. What a ridiculous child pretending that it's a real climate solution. Who do they think they are? These are some of the dynamics at play in the broader climate world for this year in particular. I'm not going to read all these points, but there's a couple things to be familiar with. As we head into COP28, this is the year of the global stocktake. This is a formal Paris Agreement process by which we're taking stock of how far we've come against our Paris Agreement goals. I'm going to speak a little bit more of that later. Yes, we are still debating exactly how to achieve those goals. There's going to be a lot of focus on the energy system because COP is in the UAE, which is a oil-producing nation, as we all know, not the only one, but that's going to be at the top of the agenda. So this is a little bit of the context. Article 6 is in here. We're going to hear more about that today. Some of the context for climate and carbon removal conversations, in particular this year. This is my interpretation of how I spoke about those two circles coming together, how carbon removal has sort of being perceived and is slowly being integrated into the mainstream climate conversation. But look, let's face it, it's been kind of a bumpy road. So on the left is a rough timeline of mentions and conversation around carbon removal in the UNFCCC world and the accompanying communities. And on the right are my sort of casual interpretations of that mood. So at the beginning, not at the beginning, but even as far back as the fourth assessment report, that was 2007, there's no mention of carbon removal. Carbon removal wasn't really considered a thing by that community. There was a little bit of mention of CCS, so I call it just not a relevant thing, at least, in that interpretation. Cutting ahead to 2015, yes, there was some mention of carbon removal, but look, it was a little bit hostile. Maybe this is necessary, but probably not, so please shut up about it. 2018, for me, was a real turning point. This was the publication of the 1.5 degree report. This was the first time that that community said out loud, there is no way to achieve 1.5 without significant overshoot, without some carbon removal. I think for a lot of people in carbon removal, this is how they started to count time as time zero. A lot of people have been working on it a lot longer than that. That's around the time that, 2015 is around the time that I personally started to think about this topic. We have gone through and are still going through what I'm going to call the trillion trees conversation. Okay, let's remove carbon, but let's do it with trees. No, trees are stupid. Yes, it's all trees. No, it's not trees. This is sort of ongoing. It's a little bit exhausting, but it's part of the conversation. If you have been ever asked, why do you hate trees? Join the club. Let me find the camera and say into the camera, I love trees. Those are obviously part of it, but that has been a conversation that persists in the background. Most recently, we had the sixth assessment report that started to get a little bit more fine about estimates of how much carbon removal we need, et cetera. I won't touch on the recent Article 6.4 discussion. I think others are going to speak to that, but that is bubbling in the background. Interesting to see how the progression has come. I think that something that we see in that progression is the changing attitudes towards carbon removal, its role as a climate solution, and what role it can play. I firmly believe that there are a lot of misunderstandings between all kinds of communities about how carbon removal works, what it is, and how it should proceed. And I think a lot of those are related to language, but one of the reasons I believe is that we often discuss carbon removal at this level. This is a picture taken out of the CDR primer. This is me reproducing an image, which was produced by somebody else, Glenn Peters originally. It shows carbon removal in the context of this cartoon drawing. In physics, we call things like this cartoons. It's not data, it's just a sketch. But it shows global greenhouse gas concentrations. This shows the global outcome of carbon removal. But remember, carbon removal is an outcome. The thing with this figure is that it's fantastic for discussing the outcome, but it gives you zero information, exactly zero, about how to finance a project, what the risks will be, whether you would want to live next to that project, how to proceed, who might be impacted, and what it looks and smells like. Even pictures like this, and some of the photos that Christian and Jan showed us earlier, and others, already give us more information about what might be difficult, what the strengths and weaknesses of different carbon removal solutions might be. I believe that the sooner and the more rapidly we get into discussing specific solutions and their specific implementation, a little bit like we are today with direct air capture, the more we can reach understanding, but also figure out where the risks and trade-offs will be. I'll just say, too, that whereas this is the domain of, let's say, climate scientists, this is the domain of project developers, many of whom are in the room as well. All right, this is a busy table. It's not necessary to read all the words. Let me just explain what it is. This is my attempt at starting to come up with helpful analogies to test different climate solutions, but also test different carbon removal approaches against climate solutions. But also, in my journeys and in my work, I try to explain these things in terms that people already understand. The left-hand column is a list of commonly discussed carbon removal pathways. I put direct air capture and storage right at the top. In the center are some of the very high-level features, not of the outcomes, remember, but of the nature of the system and the service itself. And on the right-hand side This is a work in progress, but I'm starting to sketch out analogies for existing systems. Greg, in the previous session, mentioned ammonia as a possible analogy for DAC. So I'll just point out a couple to get the idea. DAC and storage. What does this look like? I'll put on my engineer's hat. It looks like an air handling service. It has steel and construction. You use phrases like feed and FID, and it's infrastructure. It's engineering language. It's a closed operating system. Some possible analogies might be ammonia, onshore wind. It's reminiscent of drilling and pipelines for subsurface injection. Soil carbon, on the other hand, has to do with soil handling, tilling and mixing, agriculture, thinking about microbiome. It is closer to communities. People tend to live near where food is produced. It's an open system. Some analogies there might be, obviously, food and agriculture. I think you get the idea. I then did an overlay, because sometimes, the engineer in me might think these are very helpful operational analogies, but even language has power. It's important to recognize that for some of these things, for some of these words, they're not actually helpful. They may push people away or raise the type of concerns that are really important to address. Moral hazard came up on the previous panel, and we're going to see something like that here too. Green is good, red is bad, orange is uncertain. This is not very deep, but I'm really trying to work through. So what I'm trying to indicate here are common positive or negative associations with these type of analogies. In North America, where I live, or in Canada, where I'm from, or the United States, where I work, pipelines are bad. People are generally against pipeline. If you start talking about pipelines and drilling, you're not going to get a positive response. So the unsuspecting engineer might come in all happy and gung-ho with a great project plan, and as soon as the conversation turns into those topics, the mood might change. On the other hand, for enhanced rock weathering, for instance, the idea of mine tailings, generally mining is not publicly loved. Remediation of land is considered good, and agriculture, depending on the style, is mixed. I think you get the idea. Again, this is not data. These are ideas that I'm working with. This is a little bit of data. This is a reproduction of a public study of, on the horizontal axis, how much do you dread this solution, or how little do you dread it? On the vertical axis. On the horizontal axis is how well known is the solution versus how unknown it is. And the colors represent whether people consider these solutions to be natural or unnatural. This is totally subjective. This is one step up from an anecdote. Only about 100 people were surveyed. I'm citing the reference of this article published a couple years ago. I find it quite interesting, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of this. Not surprisingly, or afforestation, people have a pretty positive view. When I say people, remember, 100 people were surveyed. Direct air capture and CCS is the black dot, only because it was considered to be the least natural, and I'm going to speak more about that later, and all the other ones fall in between. Again, this is very interesting, not just because I think it informs public attitudes, but I really think this informs some of the conversation in broader climate communities. Zooming out, it's a challenging time for climate solutions. This is a list of bad and scary things. These are all things that are happening in the world that will be difficult for the carbon removal community and all climate solutions. The global stock take I'll highlight. I think we should prepare ourselves for bad news. In the same way that news headlines are often bad after COP, the global stock take headlines might be also bad because it's a broader and more deliberative and longer-term process. These aren't showstoppers. These aren't things we cannot overcome, but they are challenges. One of the things that I'm most optimistic about is things like this. These are things that have also changed. These are broader social dynamics that have changed in the last few years. Climate is a part of culture now. Every media organization talks about climate. Every business is expected to have a climate strategy. That was not the case a decade ago. Young people are beyond motivated. I realize every time you say young people, I think you might age a decade. But yeah, as I'm getting old, I can talk about young people. We know we have the money. We have more private capital than we ever have in our history. It's not a money problem. And there are a lot more people and ideas coming into this space. So I'm just going to close now with a couple of ideas to share with you. I talked about language and analogy. There are a few ideas that I think may be holding our community back. Moral hazard came up earlier. Here are a couple others. You've probably come across these. I think these are all truthy. They're not quite true, but they seem or sound like they could be true. I never get upset for anyone for asking a question, but I think some of these questions do have answers. I'm not going to answer all of them today, but I'll answer the second one. carbon removal gets too much money. That's not the case. It gets, typo on my slide, less than 0.1% of global philanthropy, $800 billion of global philanthropy total. Thank you, Climeworks Foundation. About 1% of that goes to climate change mitigation. Of that 1%, a smaller fraction goes to carbon removal. When we look at public and private spending, this is from IEA, World Energy Investment. You can see the dark green, renewables are going up, wonderful. In the very top dark purple slice is all things connected to low emissions fuels and CCUS. Carbon removal isn't even split out. It's a tiny fraction. I haven't written down the number, but it's about 1%. These are ideas that persist. They bubble around in the community. You'll come across them. You may think that some of these are absolutely true. You may think they're myths. I'd love to chat more about that at coffee. But I'll just close there and say thank you for your attention. I hope I've given you some ideas about the power of language and analogy and different ideas to think about how carbon removal is situated in the broader climate change conversation. Thank you very much.